In 1965, on the set of a Western called The Sons of Katie Elder, John Wayne went looking for a young actor with a gun in his hand, demanding to know where that commie was hiding. The actor spent the afternoon locked in a cupboard, waiting for the most powerful man in Hollywood to cool down. And he is only number 3 on this list. By the end of his life, the Duke was certain a handful of actors were destroying the movies he loved, and he named every one of them. Here they are, from 7 down to the one he hated most. Coming in at number 7 is a man who was not even really an enemy. In fact, he was a genuine close friend. But to John Wayne, what this man chose to do still felt like a deep and personal betrayal. That man was the great Kirk Douglas, one of the toughest leading men of his entire era and a frequent co-star of the Dukes in several films.
No, as a matter of fact, I don't want to get involved in a conversation on John Wayne.
The two of them were friends, but they saw the craft of acting in completely opposite ways. Wayne believed his one job was to protect his image at absolutely all costs, to only ever play strong, heroic, all-American men. Kirk Douglas, on the other hand, absolutely loved sinking his teeth into challenging, complicated, vulnerable, broken characters. And in 1956, Douglas took on the one role that John Wayne simply could not stomach. He played the tortured, mentally tormented genius painter Vincent van Gogh in the film Lust for Life.
Let me talk to Kay for as long as I can keep my hand in this flame.
When Wayne finally saw the picture, he was horrified to his core. He pulled his friend aside and demanded to know how on earth Douglas could play a part like that, insisting that men like the two of them had a sacred duty to play strong, tough characters because there were so few of them left in the world. Then he used an ugly, homophobic slur to describe the sensitive painter, a single word that revealed exactly how narrow and how fearful his idea of a real man truly was. A baffled Douglas tried to reason with him. "It's all make-believe, John," he said. "It isn't real. You're not really John Wayne, you know." But Wayne just looked at his old friend as though he had been personally betrayed.
Oh, I've made quite a few pictures with John Wayne. We have never seen eye to eye on a lot of things.
In the Duke's rigid mind, playing a weak or a troubled man on screen was very nearly a crime against manhood itself. And that tortured painter role was only the beginning of it. A few years later, Kirk Douglas went and did something even bolder. He openly hired a blacklisted writer named Dalton Trumbo to script his mighty epic Spartacus. And then he put Trumbo's real name right up there on the screen for all the world to see, helping to shatter the Hollywood blacklist once and for all. To a die-hard anti-communist crusader like John Wayne, this was a betrayal of the entire cause he had fought for. And yet, remarkably, through every bit of it, Wayne and Douglas somehow managed to stay genuine friends, trading playful, affectionate letters for years afterward. It was living proof that even the Duke's rigid, unbending lines could soften just a little for the rare people he truly loved. At number 6 is a man who represented the entire new wave of Hollywood that Wayne was certain was dragging the movies straight down into the gutter. That man was Dustin Hoffman. Now, to be fair to the Duke, his real problem here was less about Hoffman the person and far more about the kind of film that Hoffman had come to symbolize. And that film was the 1969 sensation Midnight Cowboy.
Look, with these gals that want to buy it, most of them are old and dignified. Social register types, you know what I mean? They can't be trotting down to Times Square to pick out the merchandise.
Midnight Cowboy was every single thing John Wayne feared rolled into one movie. It was gritty, it was bleak, it was sexually explicit, and it told the grim story of a struggling male prostitute and a sickly little con man scraping to survive in the filth of New York City. The film was considered so adult and so shocking that it was slapped with an X rating. And yet, to Wayne's absolute horror, it went on to win the Academy Award for Best Picture.
The winner is Midnight Cowboy.
In his infamous 1971 interview, Wayne savagely attacked the film as perverted, sneering with contempt at its portrayal of two desperate, broken men. To the Duke, the simple fact that this was now being celebrated as the best movie in all of America was undeniable proof that Hollywood had completely and utterly lost its mind. And here is the part that must have stung John Wayne the very most. At that exact same Academy Awards ceremony, Wayne himself was nominated for Best Actor for his beloved role in True Grit, going head-to-head directly against Dustin Hoffman. And Wayne won, finally taking home the gold statue after decades of being passed over and overlooked. But even in his greatest moment of triumph, he was forced to stand there and watch that perverted, X-rated film he so despised get crowned the best picture of the entire year. Privately, Wayne actually admitted that Hoffman was a truly brilliant actor, but in a way, that only made the whole thing worse, because it meant that all of that incredible, undeniable talent was being poured into precisely the kind of movie that, in Wayne's eyes, was burying the Hollywood he loved 6 feet under.
It didn't occur to me that we are breaking social barriers or upsetting establishment values.
In truth, Wayne's fury at Midnight Cowboy was really fury at an entire new system. Just a short time earlier, the old production code that had strictly policed every single movie for decency had finally been thrown out and replaced with the rating system we still use to this very day. To the Duke, that one change had thrown open the floodgates to filth, suddenly allowing all the sex, the violence, and the despair that he was certain was poisoning the minds of American audiences. Dustin Hoffman and Midnight Cowboy just happened to be the brilliant X-rated face of that entire revolution.
It never happened in the history of the industry that an X-rated film was voted the best picture.
We never ever thought that this could win an Oscar.
And John Wayne simply could not forgive a system that would reward what he saw as garbage with its single highest honor. Landing at number 5 is the younger man who came riding in to steal his crown. That man was Clint Eastwood, the rising new king of the Western, the one single actor who genuinely threatened to replace John Wayne as the face of the entire genre. For Wayne, this was sacred ground. The Western was his domain. The cowboy was his character, and he held very strict, very personal rules about exactly how the frontier and its heroes were supposed to be shown to the world.
He knew his lines backwards. He had very firm ideas as to how he wanted it to be shot. Don't photograph me from here, this is how I like to do this, etc., etc., etc.
Then, in 1973, Clint Eastwood went and directed and starred in a dark, brutal, almost supernatural Western called High Plains Drifter, a film in which the so-called hero was a cruel and vengeful stranger. The townsfolk were sniveling cowards, and the entire movie dripped with violence and moral rot. To Eastwood, it was a haunting fable. To John Wayne, it was a flat-out insult to the memory of the Old West. Wayne was so deeply offended by what he had watched that he sat down and personally wrote Clint Eastwood an angry letter about it. As Eastwood himself revealed many years later, Wayne complained bitterly that the movie wasn't about the people who really pioneered the West. In plain English, the Duke was telling the new young gunslinger that he was disgracing the whole genre, dragging the noble American cowboy straight through the mud. Eastwood, who understood perfectly well that the two of them came from two completely different worlds, never even bothered to write him back. He simply kept right on making his dark, revisionist westerns. And the irony here is almost too perfect to believe. Decades later, Clint Eastwood would go on to direct a western called Unforgiven, a film that ripped away every last shred of glamour and romance from the gunfighter myth, and it would win the Academy Award for Best Picture.
And the Oscar for the Best Picture of 1992 goes to Clint Eastwood.
The dark, morally complicated, brutal vision of the West that John Wayne had raged against in that angry handwritten letter was now being honored as an American masterpiece. Eastwood had not merely survived the Duke's disapproval, he had taken the entire genre, reshaped it completely in his own image, and ridden off into the sunset with it. The torch had been passed, whether the old cowboy liked it or not. At number 4, the chairman of the board himself, Frank Sinatra. On the surface, these two should have been natural allies. Both were Hollywood royalty, both leaned conservative in their later years, and both were giants of their era. But back in 1960, they very nearly beat each other senseless. The whole thing started when Sinatra decided to hire a screenwriter named Albert Maltz to work on one of his films. There was just one enormous problem. Albert Maltz was one of the infamous Hollywood 10, a writer who had been blacklisted and even thrown in jail for refusing to answer questions about communism. To John Wayne, this was nothing less than a declaration of war. Wayne was one of the most powerful anti-communist crusaders in all of Hollywood, a leader of the movement dedicated to keeping suspected communists out of the movie business entirely.
I think it was probably a very necessary thing at the time, because the radical liberals were going to take over our business.
So when Sinatra openly hired a blacklisted communist writer, Wayne saw it as a betrayal of the whole country. When a reporter asked him what he thought of it, Wayne fired back with a vicious shot, sarcastically suggesting the reporter go ask Sinatra's powerful crony, a young senator named John F. Kennedy, what he thought about people hiring communists. In a single sentence, the Duke had just dragged a future president of the United States into the fight. The bad blood exploded for real a short time later. The two men ended up at the very same Hollywood benefit, held at a club called the Moulin Rouge, and the tension between them finally boiled all the way over. According to reports from that night, Frank Sinatra and John Wayne got right up in each other's faces, and the two legends came within an inch of an all-out brawl, nearly throwing punches before others rushed in to drag them apart. Picture it, two of the most famous men in all of America, ready to slug it out in a nightclub over politics. Wayne later tried to play it cool, claiming there had been no trouble at all, but everyone in that room knew the truth. The Duke had drawn a hard line, and Frank Sinatra had marched right across it. What makes the whole feud even more fascinating is what happened afterward. Sinatra, buckling under enormous public pressure, was eventually forced to fire Albert Maltz and cancel the entire project. And in one of the great twists of Hollywood history, Sinatra himself would drift to the political right in his later years, eventually campaigning for Ronald Reagan, the very same cause that John Wayne had championed for decades. The two icons even ended up on the very same side. But back in the white-hot summer of 1960, in the heat of the Blacklist era, none of that mattered one bit. In that moment, Frank Sinatra was everything John Wayne was fighting against. Number 3 made the Duke so furious that he reportedly reached for a weapon. That man was Dennis Hopper, one of the wildest and most rebellious actors who ever lived.
And strangely enough, I worked more for him than I've made 3 movies with him. I made From Hell to Texas, and then Sons of Katie Elder, which is the one I'm about to talk about.
Oh,
and then,
yeah.
And then True Grit, when I'm like, editing Easy Rider.
Hopper was the screaming face of the new counterculture, a hard-living, drug-fueled hellraiser who represented absolutely everything the buttoned-up Duke despised. The two of them were forced to work side by side on the 1965 Western, The Sons of Katie Elder. That set quickly became a battlefield. To Wayne, the long-haired, anti-establishment Hopper was a living, breathing symbol of the hippie movement he was certain was destroying America from the inside out. But the situation turned genuinely dangerous over something that happened off the set entirely. A radical activist had given a fiery, foul-mouthed speech at the very same college that Wayne's own daughter attended. And the Duke, in a blind fury, decided to pin the blame for the entire rotten direction of the 1960s squarely on Dennis Hopper. He took to calling the young actor his own personal in-house commie, and then things went to a place almost too wild to believe. According to accounts from people who were close to Hopper, an enraged John Wayne actually went looking for him on that set while carrying a gun, storming around and demanding to know where that commie was hiding. One of the most powerful men in all of Hollywood was reportedly hunting a young actor with a firearm purely over politics. A terrified Hopper is said to have spent that entire afternoon hiding in a cupboard, waiting for the Duke to cool down. And then, just to pour salt in the wound, Hopper went off and directed Easy Rider, the drug-soaked biker movie that became the ultimate anthem of the counterculture.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of people who don't like Dennis and me and Bert Schneider out there in California.
Yeah.
I think about 3,000 or 4,000 executives had to pack up and move out.
Should anyone not know, it's because of the gigantic success of Easy Rider.
Wayne branded the film perverted. In his eyes, Dennis Hopper was not merely an annoyance, he was the enemy. And here is the strangest twist of the whole thing. The truth is that John Wayne had actually helped Dennis Hopper in the first place. Hopper had been quietly frozen out of Hollywood for years because of his impossible, self-destructive behavior. And it was partly thanks to Wayne, a friend of the young actor's mother-in-law, that Hopper landed the role on Katie Elder at all.
Actually, John Wayne and Henry Hathaway, who I'd gotten in trouble with Hathaway before, rehired me. I went back to work on The Sons of Katie Elder after 8 years of being out of the picture, so
And you behaved yourself?
The Duke had thrown the kid a genuine lifeline, and what he got back in return was a long-haired radical who seemed to stand for everything he hated. Amazingly, the two men would even work together yet again a few years later on True Grit. But no matter how many films they shared, John Wayne never once stopped seeing Dennis Hopper as a walking symbol of the rot. At number 2 is the actor who did something John Wayne considered far worse than merely making bad movies. He considered it outright treason. That name was Jane Fonda.
I think that she's a little mixed up in her thinking, and I guess she feels the same about me. That's our right as Americans.
I'm glad to live in a country where people are free to disagree. Even if it's me, some of them disagree with.
Now, Wayne was one of the most fiercely patriotic men in all of Hollywood. He had even gone out and directed and starred in The Green Berets, a film made specifically to support the American soldiers who were fighting and dying in the Vietnam War. To Wayne, standing behind the troops was nothing less than a sacred duty. Jane Fonda did the exact opposite, and she did it louder than just about anyone alive. As the Vietnam War dragged on and on, Fonda rose to become the single most famous anti-war activist in the entire country. Then, in 1972, she traveled all the way to North Vietnam, the very enemy that young American boys were dying to fight, and she was photographed sitting and laughing on top of an enemy anti-aircraft gun, the exact kind of weapon used to blast American pilots out of the sky. That one image exploded across America like a bomb, and it earned her a cruel nickname that would haunt her for the rest of her life. They called her Hanoi Jane. For a proud, flag-waving patriot like John Wayne, this was very nearly beyond all forgiveness. In his eyes, Fonda had not simply protested a war, she had betrayed the very soldiers that he had spent his whole career honoring up on the screen. Wayne made no secret whatsoever of his disgust, flatly declaring that Jane Fonda ought to be deeply, profoundly ashamed of herself. And here lies the cruelest irony of the whole thing. John Wayne was actually lifelong friends with Jane's own father, the legendary actor Henry Fonda, despite all of their political differences over the years. But Jane had crossed a line the Duke could never, ever forgive. In his mind, she had used her fame and her platform not to entertain America, but to humiliate it on the world stage. To her enormous credit, Jane Fonda would spend the decades that followed expressing deep and genuine regret over that single photograph.
I will go to my grave regretting the fact that I was photographed sitting on an anti-aircraft gun.
She later called it a thoughtless, terrible mistake, openly admitting that it had wounded countless American soldiers and that she would carry the shame of it with her to her grave. But none of that remorse came anywhere near in time to soften John Wayne. To the Duke, who had wrapped himself in the American flag both on the screen and off it, what Jane Fonda had done that day on an enemy anti-aircraft gun was a betrayal that no apology could ever fully wash away. In his eyes, she represented a Hollywood that had turned its back on the very country that made it possible. And that brings us to number 1. The actor who humiliated John Wayne on the single biggest stage in the entire world, and whom the Duke never, ever forgave. That man was Marlon Brando. Widely hailed as the greatest actor of his whole generation, and a complete political opposite of John Wayne in every way imaginable.
And then John Wayne looked like he was about ready to get a posse together. He looked so did that surprise you that they would be angered that you desecrated their cathedral?
I wasn't surprised, no.
The explosion came at the 1973 Academy Awards, in a moment that has gone down forever in Oscar history. But the bad blood between them ran much deeper than one single night. Marlon Brando had spent his entire career representing a brand new kind of acting, the raw, mumbling, deeply psychological method style that had completely revolutionized Hollywood and made Wayne's older, stand tall and say your lines approach suddenly look ancient by comparison. The two men were the ultimate clash of the old guard against the new, the movie star against the artist, the myth against the rebel. So when Brando then chose to use the industry's single biggest night to attack the values Wayne held most sacred, it confirmed every last thing the Duke had ever believed about him. Brando had just won the Best Actor award for his legendary role in The Godfather, but he flatly refused to show up and accept it. Instead, he sent a young Native American activist named Sacheen Littlefeather up to the stage in his place, to deliver a speech protesting the shameful way Hollywood had treated Native American people for decades.
I'm representing Marlon Brando this evening, and he has asked me to tell you in a very long speech, which I cannot share with you presently, that he very regretfully cannot accept this very generous award.
And here is the crucial part. John Wayne had built his entire legendary career playing cowboys who hunted and shot Native Americans on the silver screen. So this protest struck like a dagger at the very heart of everything the Duke had ever stood for. Backstage, Wayne completely lost his mind. According to Little Feather herself, the Duke became so enraged by the protest that he physically tried to storm the stage to drag her off of it, and it reportedly took as many as 6 security guards to hold the furious old cowboy back.
So this was one of the most famous moments in the history of the Oscars. Apparently, John Wayne had to be restrained from going up and just like throwing this woman off the stage.
In the aftermath, Wayne was openly, bitterly contemptuous. He sneered that if Brando had something to say, then he should have had the courage to show up and say it himself, instead of sending, in Wayne's own mocking words, some little unknown girl and dressing her up in an Indian outfit. To the Duke, Marlon Brando had used the Oscars to spit all over the cowboys and Indians mythology that had made him a legend, and that was a sin he would carry with him all the way to his grave. The protest itself was about something painfully real. At that exact moment, Native American activists were locked in a tense, armed standoff with the United States government at a place called Wounded Knee, and Marlon Brando wanted the entire world to finally pay attention to it.
I felt that it was a marvelous opportunity for an Indian to be able to voice his opinion to 85 million people. I guess that was the number.
Much of the glittering Oscar crowd actually booed Sacheen Littlefeather off the stage that night, and she would go on to suffer abuse and serious damage to her career for years afterward. Astonishingly, it would take the Academy nearly 50 long years to finally issue her a formal public apology for how she was treated.
The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences is apologizing to Sacheen Littlefeather.
But John Wayne went to his grave, still believing that she and Brando had desecrated the Hollywood he loved. So there you have it, the 7 actors that John Wayne believed were ruining Hollywood. A friend who dared to play the weak man, the face of a filthy new kind of cinema, a crown-stealing successor, a communist sympathizer, a counterculture rebel, a wartime traitor, and the political provocateur who humiliated him on Oscar night. Each and every one of them represented a different piece of the world that was rapidly slipping out from under the Duke's boots. But here is the hard truth that John Wayne could never quite bring himself to accept. He lost. The Hollywood he was fighting so desperately to save was already gone, and the new Hollywood, the one he hated with all his heart, was the future whether he liked it or not. The dark westerns, the protest films, the complicated and broken anti-heroes, all the very things that horrified him would go on to be celebrated as some of the greatest art the movies have ever produced. Clint Eastwood became an immortal legend. Marlon Brando became a god of acting. Jane Fonda went on to win Oscars of her own, and the men the Duke had dismissed just kept right on winning. John Wayne died of cancer on June 11, 1979, at the age of 72.
It was front-page news all over the world today. John Wayne was dead. In Tokyo, the headline read, "Mr. America passes on."
Just weeks before the very end, frail and dying, he summoned the strength to make one final, unforgettable appearance at the Academy Awards, and the entire room rose as one to give him a thunderous, tearful, standing ovation. The establishment adored him right up until the very last, even as the culture itself moved on without him. And that was the great contradiction of John Wayne. He was a giant, a legend, a true American icon, but he spent his final years locked in a war against the future, naming his enemies one by one, fighting battles he had already lost, and defending an idea of Hollywood and of America that was vanishing right before his eyes. The Duke went down swinging with everything he had. He just never quite realized that the fight was already over. And here is the final, haunting truth. The fight over John Wayne did not end when he died. In many ways, it is still raging on today. Decades after his death, a major university quietly removed an entire exhibit that had honored him, no longer willing to celebrate his old image once those harsh 1971 interview remarks came roaring back into the spotlight. And yet, at the very same time, a large American airport still proudly bears his name to this very day. The Duke has somehow become 2 men at once, a beloved national hero to some, and a troubling symbol of an uglier past to others. The war he waged over what Hollywood and what America itself was supposed to be is a war we are all, in a strange way, still fighting right now. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to give the video a like. Tell me down in the comments which of these feuds shocked you the most, and subscribe to the channel for more untold stories from the golden age of Hollywood. I'll see you in the next one.